Oops, it's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Hi, everybody. It's Jill, your GM. I am really happy that we're able to get down a bonus episode today. This is not going to be in story for Oops All Bards, although we'll certainly be talking about the plot up to where you've listened so far. And it's not really a barbecue episode because we're not talking about any sort of recap. This is just going to be a chance for some of us on the Oops All Bards team to talk about D&D. So if you are not caught up on Oops All Bards, still recommend getting caught up so that you understand some of our references, but this is not going to be canon, so don't worry about it if you're a couple of episodes behind. So with that said, I'd like to let everybody else at the table introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Ashley Banks, and I play Belle Cernamiel.
Hey, I'm Ross Curry, and I play Andra Carrowhold.
And I'm Nate Runkle, and I'm the producer of this show.
So we're a small group today, but at the table we have Ashley and Ross, who are both very experienced DMs. And I've mentioned before that this is my first full campaign that I'm DMing. And then we have Nate, who hasn't played since, 3.5?
No, 2.
2?
Yeah.
So it's been a while since Nate has jumped into a game, but Nate has certainly learned a lot about D&D from playing with us. And one of the things that has come up a lot while we've been playing Oops All Bards is the fact that, I homebrewed this entire world. But at the same time, I'm borrowing heavily. Most of you, I think all of you, except for Belle, come from colleges that are in, official Wizards of the Coast publications. Although College of Tragedy is not a Wizards of the Coast, is it?
Correct. It is from Darrington Press, which is Critical Role's publishing imprint. Although the Tal'Dorei campaign setting Reborn is now available on D&D Beyond, along with the Dungeons of Drakkenheim, at least as of this recording. There may be more. They've started putting some prominent third-party content onto D&D Beyond. So as of the time you're hearing this, at least, Tal'Dorei Reborn, where the College of Tragedy Bard lives, is available on D&D Beyond.
Yeah, so we've... and then... Ashley, Bella's College of Dance is not your homebrew, but it is from a homebrew that you found and then kind of tweaked.
Yeah, I found several different homebrews, most on D&D Beyond, some elsewhere, and sort of took the parts that I liked about different ones and smushed them together.
Yeah. So let's start there. Let's talk about your experience with homebrew in general. Ross, we've talked about before. You run a couple of home games that I play in. And they're all based on modules, but you still do a lot of tweaking. And then Ashley, I don't know in the campaign that you run, how much of that is a module versus homebrew. So let's just talk a little bit about creating your own world from scratch versus running a module purely as is versus doing something in between.
Do you want to? We both. For those listening, Ross and I both looked at each other like, you,
as often happens at a D&D table when Ashley and I are together, we kind of look at each other and okay, you taking this? Am I taking this? Let's go. So yeah, I run 2 campaigns. One is actually it's technically a Spelljammer game, although we have not gotten into space yet, and I'll be the first one to tell you, because we don't have sponsors here, so I can fully say I became very disenchanted with Wizards of the Coast after the OGL situation, which, as of the time we're recording this, was right about a year ago. We're in January 2024 as we record this, and I went through a whole lot of feelings about Wizards trying to retract the OGL. That being said, so I'm still running games in based on Wizards books. That said, I do a whole lot of modification of my own, not so much with the world, but with characters. I really rework almost all of the NPCs that appear in my games. But I do find the hard work of world building, I like that being taken off my plate. So to be able to run something in either I mainly run in Exandria, which is the Critical Role world, or Eberron. Not so much Forgotten Realms, but having a world already built is something that I like, because that's just one less thing I have to think about, and I can think about more smaller, more niche things within that world, whether it's a city or characters, to focus on. And that's where I put my quote-unquote homebrew energy.
Yeah, so the campaign that I'm currently running is mostly I run one-shots, which I think we've talked about in past episodes. But the campaign that I'm running is for friends of mine from college, and so it started out, it was my first time DMing and their first time playing, and so, it's just been a very slow, long thing. So we're actually running Horde of the Dragon Queen. When we started, I wanted to start with something very small, so we actually just did some, Adventurers modules, the Adventurers League modules that were set in Flan, and ran those. And I actually very quickly, I knew I was a new DM, so I was like, okay, I need structure, I need somebody to tell me what to do. And I very, very quickly got really annoyed with it, because things wouldn't be consistent, or things would be explicitly said, and then later on something would happen that would go against what had already been established, and I just got so grumpy with it. So I kept homebrewing more and more, and I made recurring characters. I was like, okay, there's no reason why this has to be a new character. It's going to be the character we saw 2 modules ago. And that's sort of how that grew out. So for the campaign I'm running, I'm using an established book, but yeah, the NPCs are almost entirely different. The hooks are often changing, and really I'm just trying to use the world that already exists, so that I don't have to come up with logical reasons for infrastructure to function.
Ross, you'd mentioned the whole OGL kerfuffle.
Sure.
And that's part of the reason that I decided to set this in a whole homebrewed world, because if things really broke bad with that situation, it was like, I want to be able to take as much of this IP as I could out of the Wizards of the Coast universe. So can you do a 30-second or less recap of it?
Yeah, in early 2023, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast's parent company, started thinking about what they're going to do for the next iteration of D&D. 5e has been so successful for nearly a decade now. But, companies move on, and Hasbro has gone through some leadership changes. It's affecting both D&D and Magic the Gathering, which are the 2 properties under the Wizards of the Coast banner. And one of the biggest things that has allowed D&D to thrive over the past decade has been what's called the Open Gaming License, or the OGL. And that allows third-party creators to, as long as they don't trade on specific intellectual property, to create things based on the D&D system. And about a year ago, they completely proposed reworking the license in a way that was going to put some really wonderful and creative creators who have really taken what D&D was from Wizards of the Coast and helped cause the explosion. And this includes, Critical Role, Dimension 20, Kobold Press,
The Adventure Zone.
Well, that falls under, sorry. This is more on the publishing side, because the Adventure Zone falls under the fan creation license, which is a different
so
thing.
the books wouldn't have been affected?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But things
You'll learn something new every day.
But things like, all of the books that Kobold Press puts out, some of the stuff that MCDM had put out up till that point would have been, not only would they not have been able to do it going forward, but I think it would have retroactively pulled the license. Someone in the comments is going to call me out for getting this not quite right,
That's okay. That's engagement.
But the bottom line is Wizards did a big middle finger to the third-party or independent creator community that had almost as much contribution to the success of D&D 5e over specifically the past 5 to 6 years as Wizards itself had. And it was a whole kerfuffle in the community, and I was very much on the independent creator side of this.
I think we all were.
Most of the community was.
Yeah.
And then they,
Walked it back.
They walked it back in the most cowardly way possible, but at least they walked it back.
Yeah.
But the upshot of this is like, I am so much more interested in others. I'm going to continue running 5e, but I am looking forward to. I just got my Shadow Dark book from Kickstarter. I've got a whole bunch of other systems.
I've been waiting for an excuse to run Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
There's the Kids on Bikes system. There's so many systems. But the upshot is, we at this table have complicated feelings. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I have complicated feelings about 5e.
Yeah.
The Bar to BQ heads back to the grill right after a quick ad break.
So all of that's a long way of circling back to why I decided to set this in an entirely homebrewed world, because I could have easily dropped you guys into Forgotten Realms. I could have easily dropped you guys into one of the other campaign settings. I wasn't going to put you into Ravenloft Strahd. Like, this was not that kind of campaign. But I wanted to make sure that, knowing that at least at the start and currently as we're recording this, there's no plan on like publishing any modules coming out of Oops All Bards. Although if there's demand, let us know. We weren't going to come up against the problems with the OGL, but I still felt really kind of icky, like creating a product that was promoting Wizards of the Coast IP at the time. That being said, like, the rules of D&D are what they are. And there are a lot of mechanics and a lot of creatures and builds that we have, all of us, been using over the course of Oops All Bards. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is, in the world of Oops All Bards, like, most of the baddies that you've encountered, at least so far, are humanoids. They're not
monsters.
They're not monsters. But at the same time, when in the episodes that were on the train, you did encounter a couple of like the classic D&D baddies. You had a mimic that was disguised as a dining table in the first class dining car.
Hate when that happens.
And then you had a gelatinous ooze in the freight car. So I'd love to get some thoughts from you about how it worked dropping those into this universe, or if you have any questions for me about like why I did that.
Can I just say, I love when we were getting rid of the gelatinous cube, the consideration put into what is the ecological impact. Because everybody knows in an innate way that oozes belong deep in cavernous dungeons. And what could be happening here for the local flora and fauna? I guess that doesn't really necessarily get to, but it's the kind of thing that I think is really fun about, like, pulling a classic monster, but it wasn't in the classic setting where you find the classic monster, right? I really was delighted by that.
And I think I just called it a gelatinous ooze instead of a gelatinous cube, but the idea of like having gelatinous cubes do have movement, which I had not forgotten, but kind of disregarded at first when I was building this. And it was like, oh no, it can move 5 feet a turn. So
they move very slowly.
So when you dump it out into the forest, there is a chance that it can do some very slow damage. This is like classic zombie movies at half speed, maybe, sort of damage. But I really enjoyed the thoughtfulness that went into, and like the silliness that went into that debate.
The blob.
Yes.
We're gonna come back for season 2 and be like, everybody's talking about this new horror story that's going around, and it's gonna be based on a gelatinous cube that just rolls into town very slowly.
Both the Mimic and the gelatinous cube are so iconic in the lore, going all the way back. God, the Mimic, I'm pretty sure goes back to first edition. Gelatinous cube might as well, but gelatinous cube might be second. I don't know off the top of my head, but they are such iconic beasties to come across. So both the Mimic and the gelatinous cube are such iconic monsters. So Jill, I wanted to ask you, like, when did you know you were going to put those into the game? Were there any other, like, kind of classic monsters that you really wanted to run from a DM perspective that either you thought about putting in, or that, I guess, if you're thinking about putting them in later, you shouldn't tell us, but are there any others that you thought about in those spots?
Yes. So I made the decision to include them around the time that I decided that there was going to be a train encounter, or at least I decided the Mimic. Originally, I had thought that, like, the freight train, like, you were going to be doing a lot more, or the freight car, the cargo car, you're going to be doing a lot more exploring of, like, which of these things is a Mimic, because that's the classic, like, the Mimic is the treasure chest sort of thing. And I decided that was a little bit too much of a trope, like the trunk that is a Mimic. But I really wanted there to be a Mimic there because I didn't think any of you were going to expect it because of the world that we created. It just didn't seem like the Mimics quite fit there. And then I was thinking for the gelatinous cube about, like, I knew that there was going to be, like, a cage on board to put Gideon into, but then it was like, why are we putting Gideon into a cage? Like, if somebody's going to abduct Gideon, do we need this giant cage for him? Or, like, can we just hog tie him and haul him off the train? And then it was like, oh no, we can use the cage, like, as a means of torturing him rather than, and, like, I didn't want to get super sadistic about it, but the idea of slowly lowering the cage into the gelatinous cube, which is a very slow killer. Because the thing about a gelatinous cube is that you can push through it. Like, you take damage every turn that you're in there. But if you are in a cage that is inside of the gelatinous cube, there is no way out unless somebody lifts the cage up. Mm-hmm. So you're stuck in there. So there was this kind of, like, almost Saw type puzzle to it that I found to be, like, an interesting way of approaching this more classic trope. And then I watched the D&D movie. I rewatched the D&D movie because I've seen it a couple of times. And when they have the gauntlet that they run in the third act, you see both a Mimic and a gelatinous cube. And it was like, okay, well, these are also things that other people who are maybe not as familiar with D&D but have seen the movie would understand. So it was also kind of a nod to, like, here's a thing from D&D that, like, people know this is a thing from D&D. So I thought that would be a good thing to kind of throw in there.
Yeah, as somebody who hasn't played in 30 years, it was like that moment when Captain America gets the Wizard of Oz reference. You know.
I thought you were going to say that moment from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when Leonardo DiCaprio
when
points at the screen.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
In terms of other classic D&D monsters that I had thought about including, and I'll tell you that, like, I've written them out. They're not going to happen in the rest of the season, so I'm not giving anything away. I definitely thought about including a beholder because I think beholders are really cool. They're fun, like, and I'd also thought about including mind flayers in that first encounter in the stadium.
Ooh.
And I decided, like, you were all too low level to have
we wouldn't have survived
a
that.
mind flayer, let alone several mind flayers. But I liked, because the idea is, like, you're all being held here and forced to listen to this projection of Malvo. And so having a mind flayer being the one who's, like, it's not just that you're being held, but, like, it is actually, like, doing psychic damage, just being exposed to this. And it was like, I don't want to start a bunch of level 4 bards with that. That would be cruel. But I think mind flayers are really cool. And I am, we'll see if maybe in season 2 I figure out a way to work them in, or if I can, like, at least take some of the attributes of a mind flayer with something that I've homebrewed, maybe. but they're certainly interesting. I will tell you that like the classic D&D monster that I didn't ever think about including was an actual dragon.
It is in the name, isn't it?
It is in the name.
Yeah.
And yet there are, and I've seen this in both campaigns that I've played in and run, like there are somehow seem to be remarkably few dragons in Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, we didn't go into any dungeons this campaign either, so.
No, you didn't. The closest would have been the closest you would have gotten to a dungeon crawl would have been when you were at the Alcazar. If you'd had the opportunity to explore the house, there would have been some dungeony things that would have happened there.
So my read on the Alcazar was very, like, all I could think of was the game The Seventh Guest. Was that kind of like what that was
I was
possibly
thinking,
going to be?
I was thinking The Seventh Guest for sure. I think that's like seminal elder millennial gaming experience. I was thinking of Clue. I was thinking of, if you remember, was it 3-2-1 Contact on PBS? They had the like mathematical haunted house where you had to like solve math puzzles to like get, it was a music video sort of thing that like I still can see, like if I close my eyes, I can still see clips of this. I've never gone back to see if it's on YouTube. I'm sure it is. But a haunted house or, you know, a mystery house, a dungeon, like I am interested in puzzles, and I thought for an all bard party to put in front of you something that was going to like be a house where there is danger. You can take some damage here. There are going to be things that can jump out at you, but it was going to be more about solving puzzles than about actually fighting things. And then, you know, like I'm glad that I didn't spend too much time preparing this because we just bypassed it completely.
The Bard BQ continues right after these messages.
So, you know, because this is a bonus episode, let's do some thought exercise here. When designing puzzles, how do you design puzzles for, you know, there's always a little bit of a gray area between the player and the character. And, you know, our table is very heavy on, like, I think everyone who sits and plays at this table is a puzzle solver by nature.
Ashley loves puzzles. Belle.
Not so much.
No.
Right. So I'm just curious, like in the hypothetical exercise, how would you have dealt with it? Like, how would you have given us puzzles that, like, you know, Ross and Ashley and Anne and Bob and Tage might have been able to figure out, but that not necessarily our characters would figure out, because bards aren't always the most intelligence-driven.
Yeah. That's a really good question. And honestly, like it's been so long since we recorded and I planned that episode that I don't entirely remember how I had planned it out. But I will tell you that as a player, I've been in that position where like I know the answer to this puzzle. Like Jill knows the answer, but my PC probably does not. And there have been a couple of times where like I blurted out the answer to a puzzle and everybody's looked at me and was like, okay, yeah, like I got it right, but that was kind of out of character. And so there was that concern that when I presented you with these things, like something like that would have happened. And so I think that as I'm trying to recall back on this, I think that one of the things that I tried to do was like create situations in which one of you might be blinded or deafened, so that like you just literally as a player, like you as a player can do whatever the hell you want, but like anything that you say or do above table is not going to factor into what is happening with the players. I toyed with even the idea of like making some of you leave the table, the physical table, to get through these puzzles. Our friend Michael, we've talked about Michael before, who ran a D&D campaign that all of us played in,
And who's an executive producer.
and who's one of our executive producers with the Porch Room. We'd had a session where, and I think this, Ross, was before you joined. And Ashley, I don't honestly remember if you were there, but he had half of us go sit in his bedroom and put music on, while he had the other half of the party going through a thing, and then he had a switch because we both had different components of this. We were split, and we both had different components of this puzzle that we had to solve on our own. And it was impossible to get rid of that bleed between player and character in that case. So he handled it by keeping the players physically away from each other. You can do things like that by just DMing or text messaging each other. there are different ways of getting through that so that you're at least avoiding some of that like player character interference, but it's not going to be perfect.
So Nate, you've been sitting here listening to the state, like, I know you played in 2E. You've been sitting here listening to us playing 5E. Like, as you've been sitting there, not just from how you mix this, how you cut things together, but like just from a play perspective, like what's jumping out at you? Like, do you have any thoughts, questions?
Well, one of the big things has been, which I don't think I'm alone in this, has been watching it be played on a show. Okay, so like instead of just playing at a table or something like that, like also producing a show. So just background, I've never once listened to an actual play podcast. And in leading up to this, I was about to, and then I was like, wait a minute. I kind of want to produce this coming from having never heard another actual play, so that I'm just kind of producing a show like what I think a show should sound like. So, well, I'm just going to say it. We're recording this after we've finished the campaign, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen now to because I like now that the influence can't really bleed in, now that we've kind of created our fingerprint, I kind of want to go back and see like, well, how'd it go? So I guess part of my question is, let me kind of turn that around on you. How did it go? Like, how does it kind of measure up against, not measure up, like it's amateur production, but like, how is the feel in relation to other actual plays that you've experienced?
I have a huge inferiority complex. So the answer is, I'm always going to have regrets. That being said, I love sharing a table with my friends, and that is really where the joy comes from. I would certainly do things differently, and as we sit here right now, I do not know if season 2 Andric is going to come back or if I'm going to come in with a new character. I don't know. And I would have done things a little bit differently in the lead up to the campaign to get more comfortable with Andric or to create a different character to begin with. I do not hold us to the standard of a Dimension 20 Critical Role, any of the big ones, because we're coming at this from a different experience level. We all have day jobs. We are not professional improvisers or actors. And my hope is that by doing this, folks who like might come from the mission rejected community who have not played D&D might get interested in it or a different RPG if D&D is not their thing, because there are so many RPGs out there that are ways to explore different themes and sit around a table and tell stories with your friends. So that's and from that perspective, I think I've felt very good about where we've landed.
Yeah, I think do we have the production value and the planning? I mean, Jill, you did a ton of planning, but like you don't have a staff of
Right.
writers.
I don't have a production team.
Right.
That other shows have. No. But also, I didn't get to play in those other shows, and I got to play in this one. So, but from that standpoint, I enjoyed this way more.
The Bard BQ keeps on grilling. Right after these notes from our sponsors.
There are a lot of actual plays out there that I love, but I also I never got into Critical Role because Critical Role is just so intimidating to me. There's so literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of Critical Role. I've enjoyed Legend of Vox Machina, which is the Amazon Prime cartoon series that spun out of one of the campaigns of Critical Role. But, I've watched several seasons of Dimension 20. I loved the first season of Dungeons and Daddies. I never got into the Adventure Zone, not for lack of interest, just it kind of passed me by. And now that's another one where there are so many seasons to catch up on. It's kind of intimidating. And I'm really a big fan of Worlds Beyond Number, but there are so many different approaches to this, and so many different, like, Worlds Beyond Number has like this incredible original symphonic score behind it that like we're just never going to have the budget for. Critical Role is all voice actors, and so like we all of us at this table have done some voice acting, but we're not, that is not our careers. That is a thing that we do for funsies. So knowing that and trying to go into this and be the best that we can be and have as much fun as we can, I will say that like I don't listen to this nearly as many times as you have to edit, but I do wind up listening to each episode 3 or 4 times, and it brings me so much joy to hear like what we have managed to pull off over these last couple of months. Like we are sitting around Ross's and my dining room table in our row home in South Philly, and occasionally we have to pause because there's a fire truck or an ice cream truck, or because one of my cats is having a snack directly behind me, or my next door neighbor's dog is howling. So we're not recording this in like a super dry studio space. We're not recording this even just in somebody's house, but like in a more remote area. We're in the middle of a city, and that we've been able to pull off what we have and to make this sound the way that it does so far, I think is really impressive.
Definitely. No, I mean, like you said it, and I think I said it earlier, I think off mic, but like, I've lived with you guys in my ears for the past few months a lot. And it is, to hear the finished product and know where it came from. I mean, like even just from the raw recording to, not just from being at the table, but from the raw recording to what ends up being released. Like, am I still critical of it? Absolutely, because I'm always going to be like, it's in my nature to be like, oh God, I wish I could have just, but if you run it back against the raw recording, you'll probably be amazed and want to like give me an award or something like that for some of the cleanup. And like I said, that's not even cleaning it up properly or right or making it as perfect as it should sound. But boy, where it comes from is just it's definitely a leap. My other question is, like you said, I haven't played since 2E, but I feel like every once in a while, like something will come up where I'm just sitting back, just kind of like, man, they as much as things have changed, things have not changed at all. Like it's kind of like, but it's kind of like when you step away from something and you come back and you start to like, oh, I kind of remember this. It's kind of like if you were to go back and play like the NES Super Mario Brothers right now, like it would take you a few seconds, but after you you start getting the button combos down and stuff, you're like, oh, I do remember all of this. And that's kind of what sitting through this has been like.
As an old 2E player, you will appreciate that this was probably back in 2012 or 2013. So it was before 5E came out, and we had all said F you to 4th edition. But one of my very good friends said, like, who I went to law school with, was like, hey, you want to do a D&D night? I was like, sure, great. And he was like, I'll run it, like, but my place is small, like, do you mind hosting it? Like, fine. Jill was going out with some girlfriends that night, and she said when she left, she's like, oh, so how long are you guys gonna play? I was like, 3 to 4 hours is a typical session. And so my buddy Steve was DMing, and a couple of the players who are now in our Spelljammer game, who we've been friends with, one of them went to grad school with Jill and his wife. We had a table full of people. Jill comes back at we started at 7 p.m. Jill comes back at 1 a.m, and we are not even close to being done. We are still nerding out on that whole 2nd edition dungeon crawl mentality. And Jill was like, you freaking nerds. I'm going to sleep on the sofa.
Yeah, I didn't even go upstairs because I figured if everybody saw me falling asleep on the sofa, they'd be more likely to want to leave my house. Didn't work.
We played for another hour.
That's great. You just reminded me that one of my memories of playing when I played in high school was I don't know how many actual campaigns I ever finished because I think we would roll characters together and we would work on backstories and everything, and then like we would play like maybe 2 sessions and we'd be like, do you want to make some new characters? Yeah, that didn't work out, let's try it
That
again.
is a thing that still happens. The number of characters that I have sitting in a spreadsheet,
I'm sure,
with different builds is character creation. It's one of the it's not when I introduce new players to the game, I do one shots with pre-gen characters, because especially if someone has never played D&D before, it's much easier to introduce by we're getting into the adventure and we'll point out what the stuff on the sheet means rather than trying to like create from a blank slate. But then once you've gotten a few sessions under and get into character creation, it is now my favorite part of the game is the character creation, which is why going back to, even when I'm running modules, even when I see an NPC in a book, I am almost always rewriting. If they're going to be a prominent NPC, I am rewriting their stat block and coming up with why is this person here? Why would they interact with the party? Like that's where I put my homebrew love in.
It's a joke about actors, but it really is like, what's my motivation? Like,
Yeah.
and I think, all of us at the table are or were theater kids. So I think that kind of speaks to our love of like how we create these characters too. I know like when I was in high school and I was doing, I think it was probably my first play that I did in high school where I would have had like, 4 lines as a 14-year-old freshman. But it was like, everybody, I want you to write your character's backstory. And I wrote pages because I just like, I love the idea that this person had this like very rich life outside of the confines of the play. And so even though she only had 4 lines on stage, like she was in her story, she was a star too. I think that one of the joys of playing D&D is being able to build those characters and create that like rich inner life that sometimes shows up and sometimes doesn't.
Sorry to drag this conversation out, but I do think it's worth, and again, drop this in wherever it might make sense. In terms of thinking about character backstories, I think there is such a thing as too much. Like, Jill, where did you want us to come from backstory wise in terms of something that fits within your world, but there's also a value to leaving blank spaces where if the DM drops something in, a player can go, oh, wait a minute, I want to link my character to that and grab it and fill in pieces of backstory without having the fully fleshed 3-page thing going.
Yeah, I think I told you all to come up with no more than one page of backstory. And I think some of you wrote it out and some of us, like we all had a Zoom call, each of us, before we started recording to kind of build out your character. And there were certain things where like, Anne telling me about like her inspiration, which we've talked a little bit about, and I'm sure we'll talk more about in the future. But her inspiration of like her parents being James Carville and Mary Madeline. And it was like, and how that fit into the College of Whispers. And it was like, great. So like knowing that there's going to be a lot of political intrigue happening here, like this is what I want to do with your parents' backstory. And that was fine. And then I said like, here are the 3 political parties. And she's like, can I write their platforms? Like, and anybody who knows Anne, she didn't write their entire platform, but like Anne did kind of build out like what these parties looked like. And so it was a conversation. I love the idea that everybody comes with like, this is an idea of the character or even the trope that I want to play. And then we can work together on how do we make that character fit into the world that we are existing in. So it's a conversation. Like I want you to have that backstory and that rich inner life. I don't want you to just show up with like, yeah, here are my stats, and I guess I'll just like figure it out on the way, because that's actually the first D&D campaign that I played in. That's how I played it. It was just like I have a character on paper. I know nothing about who she is as a person, and I had to kind of come into that, and it took me a while to do that. And I still feel like I never really truly learned how to play her correctly because of that. but also I think at the same time I would have been doing myself a huge disservice as a first time player if I had like written a novel about this is the sort of character that I want to play. Like, DM, make this fit in your world. All right, so I think we're gonna call it there for this bonus episode. We got to talk about some tropes and we got to talk about character and world building. Thank you all so much for joining us. As ever, I am your host and game master, Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy, and we'll see you really soon.
Oops All Bards is created, GM'd, and directed by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. This episode was produced, edited, and sound designed by Nate Runkle. Oops All Bards stars Ashley Banks as Belle Sternamiel, Ann Coleman as Clarice Sauercloud, Ross Curry as Andra Carohold, Tage Sinha Das as Cretaceous Thunderthigh, and Bob Killian as Colonian Stumps. The Oops All Bards theme song is by Bob Killian, with additional lyrics by Jillian Ashley Blair Ivy. Oops All Bards is executive produced by The Porch Room. We are part of the Porch Room Network on Spreaker Prime. For more information, visit oopsallbards.com. Thanks, and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Oops All Bards on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcatcher of choice. And follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Oops All Bards. We'll see you next time.
Oops, it's all Bards. Oh, what a mess.
Another quality podcast from the Porch Room.